In the desert, I saw a creature, naked, bestial, who, squatting upon the ground, held his heart in his hands and ate of it. I asked, "Is it good, friend?" "It is bitter," he answered.
What is the nature of a Souls-like? And what can change the nature of a Souls-like? Is it the action combat? The skill-based balance of overcoming overwhelming odds? Or is it the mystical world that we're often exploring, trying to find clues in a foreign land which we fail to understand? Is it both of these things? And if so, which one is more important? The question seems highly divisive, as it might differ from player to player. The first time I've heard about Bleak Faith was close to the initial release. The trailer looked interesting enough to wishlist the game, and for me there was an initial intriguing feeling watching the environment this small indie team seems to have crafted. I guess to answer the rhetorical question I posed initially, for me the mysterious world, the unknown, the exploration of things that seem nonsensical and magical at the same time is the main draw of any Souls-like I really enjoyed. As for the mechanical part, combat and the actual mechanics of the game, I'm willing to forgive a lot of faults there, and to tolerate a lot of jank if the game is interesting enough. While I'm not an expert and I don't see myself as very good at these kinds of games, Dark Souls 1 was a highlight for me, as it presented a game that I usually would not enjoy, judging by everything it was and is, and still, to my surprise, it captivated me enough to finish it. However, the things that drew me to Souls-like seemed bleak after Dark Souls 1. I finished Dark Souls 2, and while I enjoyed the game for what it is, it left no real deep impressions on me. I've played Dark Souls 3 and Elden Ring, and I never really had the time or motivation to finish them. And to be perfectly honest, sometimes even bouncing off the difficulty here and there. While I can see and appreciate the magic in Elden Ring, as in a game that is beautifully crafted and obviously seems to be done well, it still failed to evoke that feeling that Dark Souls 1 left. This might change if I ever find the time and skill, I guess, to really beat it fully. In any case, this lengthy introduction serves only to establish a wider context in which I want to look at Bleak Faith. I failed to play it on release, and I saw that many, well, YouTube authorities on everything gaming and Souls-like were not really satisfied with what the game had to offer. I opted to wait out for some time. Patches, polish, the usual, but I was not really letting the game go fully. I should have known, since my high tolerance to jank and love of worlds that captivate led me to things not many gamers are capable of. Like enjoying Lords of the Fallen 2 on release, or even worse, or better, depending on your perspective, Gothic 3 on release. The first and most captivating thing that will probably impress you in Bleak Faith is the game world. Brutalistic megastructures, grey blocks of cement, the prevalent colors of black, grey, and all shades in between dominate your first minutes. Even the robotic enemies seem to be designed with the same thing in mind. They almost seem like they are unnatural extensions of the lifeless blocks that surround you, that somehow gained enough consciousness and life to threaten you. Walking through these ruins, especially wearing shiny armor or a melee weapon, you truly feel like an anachronism caught in the ruins of a fallen world. The only thing that's breaking up these dominant feelings are the bright red and greenish neon lights you can see around, and the occasional light here and there that seems to come from one of the apartment buildings that surround you. I've been impressed by the range of environments that the devs have put together, and by their ability to create enough variety while staying in line with the general atmosphere and theme they've been going for. In whatever direction you take it, there is something otherworldly waiting for you, yet these things are logical in the natural sequence of the things that you've seen in the game already. If you climb up, you will leave the megastructure and reach high towers with mysterious creatures floating around the air, almost taking you into a realm of more traditional fiction. However, the Kenshi-like feeling of a destroyed empire and a realm of technology and grey blocks is even kept here. If you decide to go down, you will reach sewers, the underbelly of the city, and eventually great reservoirs of water. A thing I haven't seen in a lot of games like this is that your character can actually swim. One of the areas is flooded, and it features underwater areas and monsters where you could dive for loot and hidden paths. Clearly, a lot of thoughts and effort has been put into giving the game world a unique character of its own. And it shows. If there's anything that's great about this game, it's the world and exploration, and the way it slowly immerses you into its setting. While I don't plan on spoiling the game, some highlights are worth mentioning. Deluge, or the Great Flooded Area, which features underwater exploration, is one of the highlights for me. Not only because you're usually not doing any deep sea diving in games like this, but mostly because the contrast of the ruins, the deep sea with underwater remains of mysterious structures, giant robotic snake-like tentacle beasts, and red underwater neon lights that guide you and refill your oxygen, pro tip here, are really unique. It really does move you away from the whole fantasy slay dragon, cave in the mountains trope that we've seen too many times. Don't get me wrong, I'm a big fan of traditional fantasy, but these areas in Bleak Faith really felt like something different and fresh. The last areas, being the ominous desert and anomaly, are truly highlights of style and uniqueness. Generally, it could be said that style was chosen here over intricate design. This might not have been a choice that was made intentionally, but it is best explained by comparing the world to Dark Souls 1. Bleak Faith can easily compete with Dark Souls 1 when you're only thinking of style, aesthetics and atmosphere, but it's nowhere close when it gets to how tightly designed the world in Dark Souls 1 really is, and how geniusly interconnected the experience is. Don't get me wrong, the world in Bleak Faith is solid when it comes to the functionality as well, but it's nowhere close to the polished design you've especially seen in games like Dark Souls 1. Apparently the game was made by a small indie team in Montenegro, which is in my neighborhood. The brutalistic, grey, oppressive structures in Bleak Faith are inspired by the real-life setting most Slavs tend to dwell in. Slav magic, Slav melancholy, the general oppressiveness these games feature, be it something that takes itself seriously like Stalker, or quote-unquote silly shooters like Vladik Brutal, it's always the same feeling that has to be deeply rooted in the psyche of every person that grew up surrounded by what one would call a commie block. As I've already said, but it's worth mentioning again, the city areas are the highlight for me, as they are just so damn atmospheric and they seem to speak to my Slav heart. There are not many Souls-like games where one of the maps is an actual subway that is featured as a shortcut. I find that interesting and clever. Some of the areas are more traditional and they're alike areas you've seen before in games, with some disappointments here or there. It's not really that the areas are badly designed or boring, they just are less inspired and are not really fitting to the general idea and aesthetic the game is trying to sell you. One of the lower levels features a graveyard, which is no issue if you're portraying a city that still needs one. However, this one looks like it's pulled straight out of Bloodborne. It fails aesthetically and kinda seems disjointed from the whole experience. Having a Victorian-looking cemetery which is 2 minutes away from a futuristic destroyed subway might be a blend of styles, but in my opinion it damages the overall atmosphere more than being something unique or unexpected. Another culprit is probably the lower areas of the area called Machinarium, which are basically only a blue abyss where you don't see anything. Atmospheric or not, it's just plain bad and seems like an extended version of the abyss in Dark Souls 1, just longer and more tedious. However, even these areas don't take away a lot from the experience. I never found them too oppressing and they usually don't overstay their welcome either. As you progress through the game, the jank intensifies, even when it comes to area design and your general sense of progression or what to do next. Your objectives are vague from the first moment, but progression paths and moments can be hard to grasp at certain parts. As far as I understand, there is no set order to things, there are only mandatory bosses that you have to face sooner or later. The semi-open world design grants you a lot of freedom, but that freedom comes at a price. Often you're trying to figure out where you have to go next and what you are actually doing. I've got lost a few times and had to look stuff up, but in the end it was nothing too obnoxious and it's serviceable. The one good thing to take away from this is that Bleak Faith really has a game world that is worth exploring, so it's not too bad to get lost sometimes and to just explore the world. Another personal highlight is the enemy design. As with the game world, the enemies are more aesthetically than mechanically interesting. I've really seen nothing too unexpected out of the enemies, but some of the design choices here are just plain interesting. Giant mechanical eagle thing? Check. Giant mechanical worm thing in a desert? You have that too. Giant spider thing with unsettling human-like face? Also check. None of these enemies are too complicated or mechanically rewarding. However, they support the atmosphere of the game rather well. As for the gameplay, as with most Souls-likes, the inspirations are clear. And if you ever played any Souls games, you will most likely understand more than you will have to learn to actually successfully beat the game. The jank, or the fact that this was made by a really small team, shows mostly during the combat sequences. Personally, I found it to be acceptable, even endearing at certain moments, and it's more well done than not, but the jank will surely show during combat sequences, and some weird bugs and glitches are certainly to be expected. The combat itself feels really well done. I've played a melee big stick bonk build, and the weapons feel very impactful. I especially like the fact that dismemberment is a part of the game as well, and it's rather satisfying to start hacking enemies to pieces. However, it seems that devs are fans of Monster Hunter, as the game features giant enemies which you will have to climb to defeat. The premise is simple. Your character has a special blade that is always in your inventory called the Mobius Blade. When you meet an enemy giant, you're mostly expected to beat on its legs until you do enough damage. This will enable you to climb the giant and do damage to specific points on his body by stabbing with the blade. The main problem here, except for the fact that the whole process is pure jank, it's that it's very repetitive and the enemies will try to shake you off. It's sometimes very hard to gather when you will actually have to dodge an attempt the mob will make to shake you off. It's poorly visually indicated, and the best way to stay on top seems to be to just change position on the body of the enemy frequently, which you can do. For me personally, the novelty of the fact that you can do this wore off pretty quickly, and it was more annoying than fun. It seems like the developers realized this as well, as later on there are not too many enemies where you are expected to do this. The approach to character progression seems to be simplified, mostly in a good way, and there seems to be a golden balance of things when it comes to character building and progression. There are only 4 stats that are clearly defined. The game does take some liberty from your usual Souls-like game when it comes to your abilities. The system basically divides them into 2 parts: perks and abilities. Perks, which are limited to 4, and their upgrades are gathered by beating bosses. On the other hand, you can have 2 active abilities. These are bound to your character. There are abilities that are granted by weapons as well, but you can switch out abilities on the go if you have enough items, or ability splinters in this case. The perks that are unlocked by beating bosses are permanent once you choose them, and the abilities can be changed. Your handler, which in Souls term would be the guy who improves your weapons and armor, is a little bit more versatile here. She actually gives you some exposition, can craft materials, and you upgrade her capabilities by gathering handler ecos throughout the world. It almost seems like many NPCs were rolled into one role here to save costs or time, but I don't actually mind. The handler personality fits very well into the world, and she sells the idea of a technologically permeated world very well, often leading you to question if you're a robot, human, squid, computer virus, or antivirus. All these parts you might play seem viable at one or another point in time. The homunculi, which I have 0 chance of pronouncing properly, are Bleak Faith's version of bonfires. These are unsettling digital silhouettes that twitch very disturbingly when deactivated and stay still once you do touch them. They are your main save points. An additional feature is that a portable version of these becomes available, which you can set up at will. For example, you could use it before a boss fight to spare you the time running back if you do die. In any case, you're limited to a single one of these, and after using them, you have to return to a static homunculus to replenish the mobile one. The system works fairly well, with the static save points mostly being available at the beginning of a new area, which means that you will have to rely on the mobile one as you explore the area. If you're familiar with the channel, or if you have seen me play any game ever, you might know that I'm not really big on crafting. There is a rather extensive crafting system in Bleak Faith, which features everything from potions to improvements for weapons and armor. It's elegantly designed, but seems very forgiving, as you will gather more things than you can really use up just by slaying filler enemies. The interesting thing here is that you don't really have anything resembling an Estus flask, but you craft potions to heal and refill your flux, that is mana. The limitation here is the amount of potions that can be active in your hotbar. You might have 200 healing potions, but only 2 are immediately available in your hotbar during combat. If you actually use these potions up and you're still in combat, you're not going gonna have any more potions available. They will only become available once you die or actually finish combat. The system works well to limit you and not turn the game into an ARPG potion spamming simulator. The game is also very generous with items that improve weapons and armor, so it is viable to upgrade different armor sets and try them out. Personally, I feel that Bleak Faith is rather on the easy side of Souls-likes. There are many features here that make your life easier. Be it that stamina isn't spent on sprinting if your weapon is holstered, or the fact that there doesn't seem to be any penalties except redoing an area if you die. However, later in the game there are enemies that apply a status effect to you called entropy. If your entropy reaches 100%, you lose the game. However, with the small debuff on each death, it seems almost impossible to get that ending, except on purpose. I finished the game with less than 1% of entropy, even though I'm famously bad at Souls-likes. While I want to avoid spoilers, I will say that the story is as confusing as it's the industry trend in games like these. A lot of things are left unexplained, mysterious by design, and vague. While I appreciate the whole atmosphere the game creates, a coherent, more explained story would be appreciated. It seems that for now, most of the things people do talk about when they try to explain the game seem to be speculations. I've enjoyed it for what it is, but I'm not gonna pretend that I understand the story enough to explain it or that the game is worth playing for the story alone. As for the character I beat the game with, it was a heavily armored fighter with a two-handed sword. This tells you how easy the game actually seems to be, as I've always used shields in any Souls game I played because I get destroyed otherwise. I've designed my character around stealing enemy health and flux, that is mana, with some additional perks that basically increased my stats and helped me with debuffing enemies. The most buggy perk in the game is probably the improved armor perk I took, which lets you survive a fatal hit every 10 minutes and leaves you with 20% health. This never seems to work out. One time, dying to a boss, it spawned a wall next to the boss, which wasn't there before, not letting me reach the boss again. Another time the game spawned some sort of weird mirage of character next to the boss. The boss proceeded to attack that one and ignored me while I have hit him. This perk seems to be really buggy, and thinking about it, it's not really that useful in a game that seems easy enough. I wasn't really satisfied with the abilities that you could choose for your character. The ability I mostly used was a simple AoE attack and a fast charge-like attack. Luckily for the game, many weapons come with special abilities, think Ashes of War, which you can use while you're wielding that weapon. This certainly helps to diversify builds and approaches. To summarize, Bleak Faith is most definitely worth your attention and time, and one of the better Souls games I've experienced. The unique world and alien feeling it evokes make it a joy to explore. However, tolerance for jank is needed to enjoy the game. Even after patches and work, the game still has that unmistakable feeling of jank on every corner. However, the important thing here is that it's not really holding the game back. It makes it feel more like a product with soul and rough edges that are likable for what they are. There are some downsides here that I would like to point out as well. There is no New Game Plus apparently. I'm not really a New Game Plus enjoyer, but I know some people are. In this case, it's not an available feature and your character will just be stuck on the last location before the last boss fight forever. I've also heard rumors that a DLC is in the works, which I hope is true. The game truly deserves more attention, and I would be happy if the game made enough money to warrant a DLC. I'll surely keep an eye on this one in any case, and if you're looking for something to play and you're in the mood for an alien world worth exploring and for truly unique atmospheric scenery, along with some Souls-like combat, well, then you have the right game. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you guys soon.